Welcome, everyone. Welcome to this Learn Live event. I am Rod Trent, Senior Program Manager at Microsoft, and I have with me a couple of my esteemed colleagues who are actually co-hosts with me on a weekly security show called Microsoft Security Insights. So if you're looking for something to join live or even listen as a podcast weekly, you can search for that just about anywhere. But I'd love for my colleagues to introduce themselves. Andrea?
Absolutely. Hey, everybody. I am Andrea Fisher. I am a technical specialist for Copilot for Security, which is what we're here today to talk about. Now, I feel like I'm going to look down like we're on the Brady Bunch. What about you, Edward?
Hi, I'm Edward Walton. I'm also a technical specialist for Microsoft 365 Defender Stack with some Copilot sprinkled in. So hello, everyone. Seems like I've been here before.
It does kind of sort of seem like it. And in fact, I don't know if anyone's ever attended our show or even been there after the live event, these screens look almost exactly the same. So it's like the same same ambiance. But we're actually here as part of a series. This is the third episode. So Andrea and Edward did the first episode on generative AI. Andrea and I did one last week on responsible AI. All in the lead up to what we want to talk about today. And also next week, I think April 9th is the next, and we'll talk about that as we go along. But Microsoft Copilot for security, which we can actually talk about it now because why? Why?
Because it went general availability, GA, on yesterday. Not joking, April Fools.
Yeah, these April Fools people are like, I don't know if I'm going to click that button, but yeah, absolutely.
Oh, there was another big tech company that won't be mentioned on here that did something sort of groundbreaking. Way long time ago, April Fool's Day. So everybody.
Oh, right, I do remember that. I also this Learn Lives this is a live event, right? We want to ensure that you, as the audience, can participate and engage with us, and we'll talk about what a Learn Live actually is here in a minute. But I also want you, if you are there and you want to test your fingers, because there will be a chance to engage and interact as part of this Learn Live, you can start here by saying hi to our moderator. This is Cecilia. She's sitting in the wings waiting to answer any questions potentially that you might have about the things that we talk about. So feel free absolutely to do that. I do want to highlight and mention something really super important about Cecilia, though. I've worked with Cecilia for the past few months. She is an amazing docs person. So most of the Copilot for Security docs that you see that released as part of general availability yesterday on our Learn Docs website, she had a hand in helping put those things together. So do that, say hi to her, but also tell her thank you so much for her hard work, because it was literally up to the last second trying to get a lot of things accomplished. Because if you know how software is developed, there are things that go into it the very last second, and then trying to keep those docs updated to match, that is super difficult. So Cecilia did an awesome job. I'm super appreciative of what she has done. So this is a Learn Live. What is a Learn Live event? So if you go to this link or use that QR code, you can actually go out and follow along with us in this Learn module, right? So we're doing this together. We're trying as a team here to provide some additional context. We're talking about the things that actually exist in this module. So as you go along in this module, you'll have a little bit better understanding, some more depth in what that content actually represents. So maybe, potentially it'll help you learn a little bit more, but also we'll provide some context so you understand why we're talking about that stuff in this learn path. And this learn path is important. Just as I had mentioned, we've done 2 of these before. So there are 2 modules that go before this one. And then obviously there's a module that goes on the 4th module that we'll cover next week as we do our Learn Live event, as we dig a little bit deeper into things like prompt books and plugins and knowledge bases and all kinds of weird things. So Copilot for Security definitely has really, really deep features and some really deep functionality and value to a lot of organizations. So this is how you get to that learn path so that you can actually follow along and do this yourself. Please, as we go along, remember, again, this is intended to be live and interactive. And toward the end of our discussion today, you'll see we actually have some questions that you can answer, right? We'll have some assessments. This is kind of our sense whether or not we covered everything adequately. So if we, watch you answer the questions that we pose to you, if you, answer them correctly, we feel pretty good about ourselves. So, kind of listen in and capture it. I think we have most everything covered today.
Rod, I'm just
Here's
going to interrupt and say we already have such a chatty group in the comments. We have way more than you and I had last week or when Edward and I did. So it looks like we have a rowdy bunch today.
Oh, let's see. Let me pop back here real quick.
We
There
got
it
somebody
is.
from South
You'll have to tell me about it.
Africa.
You'll have to
Yep.
tell me about it. My
Yeah.
my cursor's not working that way. So
No worries. We
Yep.
got Calgary in the house. We got South Africa.
Do we have any jokesters? Because it is April 2nd. Usually people kind of wait after April Fools to actually have their April Fools. I don't know. So.
Well, we had one in the chat. He wanted to downgrade to Windows 7 and show it as 11. So I get the 7-11 reference. All right, flipping channel. I get you. And the modules build upon each other. So if you have not had an opportunity to go back and rewatch the previous Learn Live with Rod and Andrew and myself, please do. They are complementing of each other, and it helps fill in gaps as you go along. And they don't consume a lot of your time. So great to go through and have a base level before you dive in deep. There you go.
That's awesome. I appreciate that. That is super important because it, like you said, it builds all the way through that series. So you get a better depth, I think, of the knowledge that you need to be able to use this product, or at least understand what its capabilities are.
For sure.
So here's what we want to accomplish today. We will accomplish this, I promise you. We'll probably accomplish a lot more than just these bullet points, but this is what is in that learn path. So talking about what Microsoft Copilot for Security actually is. I'm sure a lot of people kind of have their own sense of what I can do with it and things like that. We'll kind of define that just a little bit better. Talk about some of the terminology that you'll use as you jump through the screens and talk about Copilot for Security. We'll introduce you to some new terms and a couple ones that aren't even in the Learn Path that are actually super necessary to know. Also, how Copilot processes your input for those responses. That's interesting. As we get to that, we'll talk about that more. But you might think, well, I don't really care. I'm just a user. I want to type in a prompt. I want a response. I want the proper response. But when you understand what it is that we do on the back, you understand that Microsoft's approach to this is very, very, very super secure, safe, and responsible, right? So when we walk through that process, I hope that's what you get from that. We're going to talk about effective prompts. Prompts are the most important thing for these chatbots or these generative AI applications that are all over the place. You've probably seen it in ChatGPT or anything else, right? Depending on how you pose your question, you're going to get a different response. Copilot for Security is very specific to security. So there will be some things that you have to kind of pay attention to get the responses you want from a security perspective. We'll talk about that. And then we will end this session today talking about how you can just go forward from today's session and enable this within your tenant extremely easy. I may actually share a screen capture of that and maybe do a little demo, and we'll create one, see what that looks like. Not a lot of demos in this session today, I don't think, but the next one, the fourth one, the final one in this, there will be lots and lots and lots of demos, I promise. So,
well, you missed one of the last learn objectives, the very last one, and maybe I was so busy processing the prompt. Describe how to enable your Copilot, Microsoft Copilot for Security solution. I think maybe some people may not know that you have to go and turn it on, right? So it manifests inside your tenant / subscription, interchange the terminology at your leisure. But yeah, you have to go turn it on. It's not just automatically going to come on. I don't think you would like that if you did that, right?
Well, some people would probably prefer that. Hey, I don't even have to click a button now. It just does it for me. That's that crazy AI stuff.
Yeah, we already got that same question before we get going. So it sounds like Tespi Leave asked a question right off the bat. I like questions before we get going. Well, answer it because it's easy. Is there some demo training environment that one can use before installing it in our on-premise systems? I think there's a little bit misnomer right there with the on-premise system. So I'm sure that we'll cover it in the course of this live learn. So
Yep.
stay tuned for that.
All right, so let's start out by getting acquainted with Microsoft Copilot for Security and what it actually is. All right. Again, this is a little bit different. Andrea is our resident expert. We had a little Teams discussion a little bit earlier, and she's been on calls for 2 days talking to customers about Copilot for Security. So she knows everything. So, Andrea, what is, in your terms, in your how you think about this, what is Microsoft Copilot for Security?
So, I mean, certainly you can see the definition there, right? Which is, we'll call the tagline, right? It's a generative AI security product that's going to help the security teams, you know, defend and at the scale of AI, which, I don't know that anyone really knows what that means. But the way that I think about it is that Copilot for security is a force multiplier for your team. It's going to let you do specific security tasks, and we'll talk about what those four main tasks are in a few minutes, but it's going to help you do things faster and more easily while also helping you be more secure. And then, as all kind of automation things do, hopefully free us up because it's going to do some of the easier tasks for us. Let us spend our time doing more fulfilling or maybe more difficult things. So.
Yeah, the other thing I think, and we kind of talked about this, or at least we touched on it a little bit last time, Andrea. I was in Denmark a couple weeks back, and the price of a high, someone with highly evolved skills for security, the salary, there's such a gap in Denmark that they're just able to add literally anything they want. So a lot of these organizations too, we talk about a skills gap, right? So a lot of these organizations are considering maybe Copilot for Security would be able to augment their existing skill sets instead of having to hire somebody else. They can augment their existing security teams to do the stuff that they would have to hire someone else for potentially. So
Yeah.
even do it in a more cost-worthy manner, but still be able to get the work done, I think.
Well, I like the product knowledge aspect of it. Why
Yeah.
it can give you an output and in whatever language that you're engaging it in, you still have to understand what it is trying to convey to you, right? Rather than follow blindly. And we've coined a phrase on a couple of places that we talked about. Copilot is not autopilot, right? So use it. It is an educational tool. We don't talk about that enough. That this is an enabler and enhancement to whatever learnings that you have. And so, why the answers or the guidance that it gives you is going to be, good to help you in your day to day. I hope.
Yeah.
Don't let it go wasted without going in and trust but verify. Just look at the answer and then get a understanding of it and go and if you go that route, in my belief, it'll help you be more deliberate and more efficient in writing the prompts as you direct it better, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, the product knowledge, the best practices, you know how I feel about that term, and all the other aspects. But I am a huge fan of product knowledge outside of Copilot itself with the things that it's telling you to do. So really cool
Well,
with
and you
that.
mentioned something I thought was also interesting to highlight. I was on with a good buddy from France today, Simone, working on some Copilot for Security stuff, and he's doing all of his stuff in French just because it can, right? And he's building his content and his demos and everything in French, which is super awesome because
For sure.
it can do that. I thought this was kind of interesting. As much as effort as we put into these things at Microsoft from a marketing perspective and messaging about what our things are, this was Lance Ulanoff from Tech Radar in this recent article that he posted. Copilot for Security is not an oxymoron. But I thought this quote was super good. I'm like, hey, we need to steal this. I'm not actually stealing it. I told him about it. But Microsoft Copilot for Security acts as a sort of intense and ultra-fast security consultant, able to read through complex hash files and scripts to divine their true intent and quickly recognize both known threats and things that act like existing threats. Microsoft claims that using such a service could help address the security personnel talent shortage. I thought that was just like a great quote. And that really does succinctly, I think, explain what it's trying to accomplish. Copilot for Security is someone that, or a something that comes alongside. It augments, our existing services and our existing skill sets and stuff like that. So yeah, I think it kind of,
And I love the statement that he made. It's non-committal. Now, when you look at it, why does it exist, right? We've been talking about the lack
yeah.
of personnel to help, but let's just look. Even if you had the personnel, and you could hire everyone, and the rather the available human skill set was available, it doesn't reduce what's out there. 4,000 password attacks per second, and obviously that could be across an entire industry of using consuming cloud products on premise, whatever. But it can actually happen across a single entity that's trying to defend itself. And then the median time for attacker to access your private data, if we follow that to a phishing email, that's almost on point. I've been doing some research and everything, and that's generally called the breakout. Dwell time is how long someone's been in your environment, and because of other things, you don't realize you have an intruder. But once an intruder gets, foothold, and it has a viable account or a attack vector, it's about 72 to 83 minutes before they break out, and they start going left, right, or east, west first. And then if you're familiar with the attack kill chain or um, cyber threat model, that's only amount of time before they start going north, south, which they're doing, you know, privilege escalation. And then we go back to that number at the bottom. That seems to be the thing that we're thinking
Mm.
Copilot is going to be able to do. 3.5 million people. I mean, 3.5 million, head count globally of skilled cybersecurity professionals. Now, skilled is a word that's, you measure it, it's quantifiable, but Copilot looks to try to address that skill all the way, let's say, from I don't know if there's such things as entry level into security anymore, but someone who is junior to someone that's very senior. So if you just look at some of those, and you can extrapolate the effectiveness across everything from mitigating simple low brow password credential stuffing spray attacks to being able to watch someone who's decided it's time to break out of their attack hole, and then trying to address the 3.5 million skilled shortage professionals. So if you can just help with either one of those, I think you accomplished something, right? Because it's been tried.
But yeah, and one other thing to kind of add to that, and for whatever reason, I can't get this out of my head. I've been thinking about this recently for Copilot for Security because as analysts and security teams, we know our environment, right? We approach it from a kind of a biased perspective where we know the environment, we know the trouble users. So if something happens in the environment, that's where we go first. But a
Mhm.
Copilot, like the Copilot for Security, it approaches from an unbiased view. So it may also know our environment, but it's going to pinpoint where that intrusion potentially actually happened because we were so focused over here. It actually understood what that was because the attack chain changes constantly.
Mhm.
These threat actors are changing their tactics. So, again, coming up beside the security team from an unbiased perspective, another point of view to be able to identify that thing quickly and help minimize some of this stuff.
Yes, absolutely. And so, well, yeah. So why does it exist, right? Get acquainted with Microsoft Copilot for Security, and Andrew's uniquely qualified on this call to talk about it, right? So what does this mean to you, Andrew?
To me, I think you touched on the talent shortage very well, right? Need for automation, consolidation of those tools. And that's one of the great things. Copilot for Security wasn't designed just for the Microsoft stack, even though you can use Defender for Endpoint, Defender for Identity, Sentinel, all of those things come together. There are also third party plugins like Tanium that are available. So you can use, extensible out into your environment. If you have APIs that, again, you can use. So consolidating those security tools. Um, Helping with incident response. But to me, my favorite part, and maybe this is because of my least favorite part of when I was back in my incident response days, is that last bullet point, right? The security reporting.
Mhm.
Having to write up an incident, I know you know, Edward, is a nightmare afterward, right? You might need to bring in charts or graphs or have to write it all up. And Copilot for Security, maybe next week we can show what this looks like. You
Yeah.
can literally just ask it to customize a report, explaining the incident. You can even say, and we did this earlier today, which is why I wanted to bring this up. So you can say, please write this summary for a non technical audience. But jokingly, I said to my customer, or you could tell it to, write it like a pirate. And so they were like, well, let's see it. And so we actually had it summarize the incident so it sounded like a pirate. Now, again, you wouldn't do that, but just showing you that it has the capability to be very flexible.
Yeah, and think about each of these bullet points, right? Except for the first two. So there's limited visibility, security, privacy, compliance, and governance. There's the security posture management. There's the incident response. There's security reporting. Most of the times, in a lot of teams, every one of those is a very specific skill set, and sometimes done by a single person. When you consider how Copilot for Security works and the plugins and how it utilizes that extensibility, you can take all of those and focus it into this single tool, right? So you may have someone in your organization that's absolutely great at incident response, or that person that, loves to write reports. I promise you there's probably people like that. But there's those people that can do that, but they may not be able to do the governance or compliance. So that's where, again, where Copilot for Security adds that additional skill set, or adds a bunch of skill sets that maybe potentially you need to have.
And Andy Hendricks put a question inside the chat. Will Copilot help strengthen defense as well as just help doing attacks? Well, both. Because if you look at it and not be as reactive and be more proactive as a threat hunter, you can take the output of you doing investigations, and if you do a little bit of soft reverse engineering, you get to understand tactics that have been uncovered through incident investigation or response. Too often we see that once the problem is over, one of the IR phases, as defined in several regulatory things such as NIST and a few others, is that the post-mortem and the learning. What did we learn from this? Not just how, who, what, when, and why, but how would I put a learning to each one of those particular aspects of an incident response? So yes, it will help you doing that, because if I had to go in and use Copilot to analyze a malicious script, I'm going to want to learn more about that script, right? What made this particular PowerShell attack so devious and so untraceable? What made a WMI event, so impactful that it came across? One thing I am super interested in, is being an incident, respondent on the Microsoft Defender expert team, is going in and looking at how to build tool sets based on another gentleman. Should we build offensive tools based on some of the outputs that we get? You have to be careful with that. Building offensive tools is you get what you ask for sometimes, but then you get a better understanding, because if the adversaries are using AI, you have to use it to hold serve of a sort. So, but we have primary use cases. The incident summarization, absolutely. That is part of that reporting, and being able to write a concise, dossier of what you believe, or you believe Copilot is telling you about what has happened. The impact analysis, for sure. The blast radius, what artifacts, what entities, what workloads, what people, what services, what partners. Reverse engineering the script. I think I just described that.
That's huge. That's
That
huge.
is huge,
Yeah.
especially when you come in to do. Yeah.
Andrea, yeah.
I was just going to, even if you are, maybe if you are a PowerShell expert, or, an expert at Python, just the length of time, and I would say most people are not, right? But so even if you are, just being able to reverse engineer that script in a matter of seconds, instead of you having to eyeball 300 lines of code, just the fact that makes things happen faster is such a huge benefit.
Yep. Then there's that guided response. Obviously, that's that's super valuable to a lot of organizations, being able, because a lot of times analysts, sometimes depending on what that potential attack is, or it may not even be an attack, but that potential attack is, you don't know
Yeah,
what to do next sometimes, right?
one of the incidents in my particular tenant, someone was trying to manipulate, right? There's a suspicious inbox rule manipulation, and
Mm.
with the new guided response, it literally gives you the PowerShell on how to disable that inbox rule, so you don't even have to go look it up, or you don't even have to go find out where to do it inside of the Exchange console. You get that script, you pop it into PowerShell, and you can immediately disable that. Or going down, it asks you if a user might be logging in from an unusual location. It gives you an email. You just cut and paste that email into the window, and you can send that off, and you can say, Edward, are you in Germany? And they can respond back, right? So it just makes, again, just making things faster.
Yeah. And these are the primary use cases. These are things that we have seen through the early adopter program that have benefited immensely those that have been part of that, right? So the instant summarization all the way through the guided response. These are just the primary. There are a lot of other use cases. And as customers continue to use this, more use cases will come about that will be added, but also customers will do some things themselves. Be like, oh, this is great for that. And then you can share that with us. We're like, yeah, we'll add this to the slide next time. That's super awesome. We didn't even think about that one. But yeah, there's quite a bit of capability and possibility with this. It's super endless. So CFS, you're going to see that a lot. I did shorten it here. That is Copilot for Security. Who is it for? There's just some ideas, some people that actually might be listening in. So number one, the threat hunters. Everybody knows what threat hunting is, hopefully. If you don't know what threat hunting is and you're not doing it, you should be doing it. And Copilot for Security actually gives you back the efficiency that you need to continue to do threat hunting so you can do all the other tasks that you absolutely believe that you must do within your security teams as well. It also helps security experts, but also the security novices. Edward loves the piece where, it trains you. It builds your skill set for security. I think that's super awesome. So security novices can benefit from it as well as the experts. So everybody's going to get something from this. Partners and services. Now, we're not going to talk a lot about that as part of this session. We will talk more about that next session, next week, April 9th. But I should kind of toot our horn here as the Microsoft Security Insight Show co-host here. We are this month running a Copilot for Security themed partners month. And we have a show Wednesday night. Tanium's on. We have a bunch of different partners who are part of the Copilot for Security partner program. We had the introduction by the senior product manager, James Key, on Monday. So he introduced us to the whole series this month, and it's going to be super awesome. But there's a lot here. And I did put Defender experts there on purpose. Why did I do that, Edward?
Well, a lot of our listeners may not know that Microsoft provides first-party security services. Think of an MSSP Lite. Well, we look at signals that are coming from the Microsoft Defender security workloads and use those to provide either guided service or managed services to customer. So you can buy directly from Microsoft the security expertise. Little is it known that the largest consumer of Copilot for Security is the Defender experts team at Microsoft. Now, it is not one for one the exact Copilot being consumed by customers outside of Microsoft, but we use it also to train, whereas our human responders and threat hunters operate it, and they're doing it 24/7. But think about how they're also using the same tools that we're telling our customers that could build their skills, they could build your skills. So this is also going to go in the line what Rod said on the show. If you want to come find out how partners are utilizing this, tune in for the next session here and also come listen to us. We're going to talk about it. There was a question here. How's this going to affect MSSPs? Come to the show next week and we'll see how partners are addressing this question. How are they going to use Copilot?
The one next week. Yeah. So we have Tanium on Wednesday of our show, and
next week.
They're more of a ISV versus MSP.
Yeah.
Yep. And Lindsay, hold tight. We're going to get to how we access and purchase it a little bit later.
Yes. All right. So described the terminology. Let's talk about, and I kind of alluded to that early on, that there's some things I think you probably already recognize as just kind of standard security terms or maybe standard software terms, but there's at least one that Microsoft actually invented just for Copilot for Security, and we'll talk about that when we get there. Actually, I'm going to hand that one over to Andrea because I don't want to talk about it. So here's some things that you'll hear quite a bit, or you'll see within the UI itself. Number one, a session. That is that conversation or that specific conversation that you have with that Copilot for Security. So that's that prompt. That's actually the next bullet point, but that thing, that question that you ask or that thing you tell Copilot for Security to do, that entire activity is called a session. And in fact, when you go into Copilot for Security in the UI, there's actually a My Sessions area where it caches and keeps a list of your previous sessions. So you can always go back and utilize them immediately. And they're cached, and even the answers are cached. So it doesn't actually interact with the backend system at that point. It just shows you that entire session. So there's a session. The prompts, we're going to talk a little bit more about that today, how important prompts are, but that's that question that you pose to Copilot for Security or any Copilot, really. It's that prompt, and that prompt has to be very specific, and you want so that it produces the response that you want. All right. Capabilities and skills, and plugins and skill sets. Those are almost, Andrew, help me out here. Are those still kind of sort of intertwined? Are we still trying to figure out what the proper term is for that?
Yeah, I think we're moving skill and skill set. I think we're shifting to the left there to capability and plugin, but I also think those are super vague terms. I love how whenever we have a new technology, we have to come up with a whole new vocabulary. We can never use the same thing. So, like to
Yeah.
me, session is really your history, right? What have you been doing
Hmm.
already? But when it comes to a plugin is really what connects you to the solution, right? So there's a plugin for Defender for Endpoint. There's a plugin for Sentinel. There's a plugin for Entra, right? It is the handshake. It is the piece of code, for lack of a better term, that lets you talk to those other tools. Plugins for third party, like we said, like Tanium, custom plugins. If whatever solution you're using has an API of its own, you can write your own plugin for it. So the plugin is really just a connector, right? That is providing you, bringing up the answers to your prompt, which, like we said, is really just a request, right? A request for information.
And that last one there, that last bullet point, this may be, I promise, well, I don't promise, but this might actually be the only time that you ever hear anyone ever talk about Orchestrator, the Copilot for Security Orchestrator. That's the back end system that takes those prompts, combines it with the plugins to determine if it has that specific knowledge, and then process it through the system to produce your response. And we're going to talk about that as we go along today. But like I said, as part of this Learn module, this might be the only time you ever hear about that, unless you're obviously in a call with Andrea. So,
And I will say the orchestrator is Microsoft's biggest differentiator, and we'll talk more
yeah.
about that when we get there.
Yep. This is one I want to kind of hover here for just a second, but not too long. I mentioned that we had to actually invent a new term, and like Microsoft, and like we were talking earlier about those plugins and the skills, at Microsoft, we reserve the right to rebrand anything or rename it. But this is what we invented for the billing or the pricing for Copilot for Security. Andrea, what is an SCU?
So everyone is so lucky that we created an entirely new mechanism for charging you, right? So you're probably used to the traditional licensing method, right? I buy one license for one user. That would be something like, maybe that's how you buy um, Office or Outlook, or Defender for Endpoint, right? You buy it by, actually you buy that one by device, but never mind. Um, and then you might be used to Azure consumption, which is, right, how you pay for things like VMs or things like that. A security compute unit, brand new, it is a type of Azure consumption, right? So for using Copilot, we don't care how many users you have, right? It doesn't matter if it's 1 or 100. You're paying for a lack of a better way to say it, the amount of processing power that you are using. And that security compute unit has a price per hour, and you will pay that every hour of every day for 365 days a year. So imagine it costs $4. So 4 times 24 hours times 365 days a year. That's how much it would charge you for one security compute unit. You're probably going to ask me, well, what does that give me? Another difficult question to ask. Someone I thought made a pretty good analogy of, if somebody says, well, how much gas do I need to put in my car? Well, the answer is, what kind of car do you have? Where are you going? How fast are you going? How many people are going to be in the car? Is the trunk filled with luggage, right? There's so many things that could affect how much of a SCU you're using. I hate to give that as an answer. It's pretty vague. But yes, it is across every user. So
Well,
1 or
and I
100.
should highlight here, this is not the pricing Learn Live. If you have thoughts or questions around pricing and you want to know more about it, please don't hesitate to reach out to your Microsoft rep. If you don't have one, please reach out to us and we'll find one for you. Or it
Absolutely.
could be Andrea, because yeah, this is kind of a nuanced thing, which is brand spanking new. So there's a lot of thought that has gone into this to make it
So,
easier for customers to understand.
so there are a couple of questions around. Once again, one question from one of our viewers is one SCU can be spread across my clients as an MSSP. Not inherently, right? You can get creative, but the guardrails is that your data as a Copilot consumer is your data. If you're thinking the typical MSSP model, whereas a facilitator like Lighthouse allows you to extend out rights, roles, and responsibility, Copilot doesn't operate in that manner in this first rendition of it, right? That Copilot is enabled in that customer's operational environment and it is not proxied out to an MSSP. We'll talk about that next week a little bit more depth with some more expertise, and there are going to be numerous write-ups about how partners are leveraging this in a model that enhances theirs, but often it's going to be different. So you won't be able to use at this current moment the methodologies around lighthousing. And another question, it said, do you think Copilot is more secure than Google Cloud Security? Well, that's very subjective. I know what Copilot is, but when you say Google Cloud Security, that could be numerous things, right? That's like saying AWS security. So a little bit more being concise. One more question here that talks about the skills gap. Someone said, are there job categories or families for it? We were joking about it on our podcast Monday, that you're probably going to see job titles like prompt engineer. Someone can come in and write very efficient plugins, add-on skills, capability, whatever the terminology may be going forward. But let's just say prompts. Prompts seem to be the most important thing to understand and get right, because uncertainty in, uncertainty out, right? So being very, very deliberate, very poignant in your prompting to it is going to give you benefits, right? And then one more question, we'll get back to it. Probably create a GDAP model for MSP to support client CFC tenant. That's a good catch. That was sort of talked about on Monday. Go back and listen to the show. They covered that a little bit, but expect more things from partners and how that's going to be interacted as the product matures. Remember, we're only day 2 into GA, so we're doing it right.
The other thing, and I totally appreciate all the comments and questions that are happening in the comments. This is great. This is a great session. You're keeping Cecilia busy, and that's what she asked for, I think. But there was one, how would we reach out to you? It's really easy to reach out to me. Find me anywhere. I'm Rod Trent. You can find me on any social, LinkedIn, whatever. But if you go to the Copilot for Security page today, there is a little button that says that you can contact someone for questions about Copilot for Security. So that's probably the more official way. And eventually, and if you contacted me, that's probably where I'd end up sending you to one of those people anyway. So just want to make sure you've got that. The other thing I think also important to kind of highlight is there are actually what we call 2 different experiences to Copilot for Security, just 2. But why 2? All right. I think that's also kind of important to highlight. A lot of I've ran some surveys and polls recently, which experience people were most anticipating using, and most of them were wanting to use the embedded, because that is built into the things like the Defender console, the defenders that we have, Intra, Intune, what else? Some other things, but it's built in natively, so you can actually utilize it, and it knows about the things that are happening within that Defender tenant. But the standalone version is also super interesting. So this is a Microsoft product. Copilot for Security was developed by Microsoft, developed and released by Microsoft. But the standalone version, I think, is important to highlight because it's not just a Microsoft, not intended just to be a Microsoft tool. When we talk about plugins next on the 9th, we'll talk more about the non-Microsoft plugins. I already mentioned Tanium's going to be on our show on Wednesday. Tanium's not a Microsoft they're a partner. They're not a Microsoft person. But their plugin works with Copilot for Security. We have, I think it launched with Andrew, I think it was over 70 different partners and plugins as part of this, right? All the way from Tanium to Splunk to ServiceNow. There's like a whole, the idea is that if you have a tool, not Defender, that you're using now in your organization, you should absolutely be able to use Copilot for Security alongside. You don't have to not use it because you're not using a Microsoft tool. You should be able to use the standalone version along with whatever that it is that you have. If a plugin does not exist, and again, we'll talk more about this next time, you can create your own plugins, right? Or work with the vendor, your security tool vendor, to create one for you. Obviously, there's a whole vetting process that needs to go through and trust and stuff like that. But at the same time, this is an extensibility platform for security, right? You can plug anything into this.
Yeah, I'll say the embedded, honestly, I think maybe isn't quite as sexy as the standalone, but to
Oh,
me,
it's sexy.
it, it's my
Mm,
favorite because it's not waiting for you to ask it something. It's going to serve up information to you that it thinks you need to know already, right? So you don't have to get the prompt just right. You just have to be in the right place at the right time, right? For example, in Entra, you always have to go digging through when you have a user who is marked as risky, and you're like, well, why did this person get marked as risky? Inside Entra, you literally just go to that page, and it's going to tell you, oh, they had a sign in from Denmark from a device we've never seen before. Then there was a quick sign in from Germany, right? It's going to just bam those out for you, or guide you through creating a new compliance policy or configuration policy in Intune. So those are just things that I think could not be better for improving your ability to do your job quickly.
mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
I think
Good.
that the more experience you get with it, I find myself going to the standalone
I
because
do
I
too.
look, yeah, and I look at the embedded. I would see someone is probably a little bit more junior, wanting the context of everything. But maybe if I'm really pointing on something, I don't want to be distracted. I like the black and white, and I'm writing, and I'm remembering the past sessions and going back and look at session history and say, okay, what was I doing then? But if I'm looking at it in the embedded, I'm also looking at it. I'm looking at the investigation change. I'm looking at artifacts. It builds a complete picture. But sometimes I'm really want to look at something because I'm trying to understand something very particular that happened. Why did it decode that script a certain way? Why did it miss this embedded CMD command that was being obfuscated in such a manner? So catching the thing is not enough for me. I want to know what the thing I caught and how did the thing get by.
Yeah.
Test Believe had two questions. He said, what's the order? Purchase a license, then install something to make it work as embedded. There's no right or wrong. I would think you could buy Copilot for security without having the Defender products deployed, but the embedded experience won't be what you want. So I would say with a great amount of certainty, most of the customers already have something that is a Microsoft security workload already there. And right, and then once it's there, then the Copilot overlay comes in and you see it.
Like,
But I could imagine you could buy the license first and not have a single Microsoft security thing deployed.
well, again, right, not a license, right, but you could purchase a
Yeah,
Yeah.
security
license.
compute unit,
Yeah.
right? And yes, the embedded consumes compute units as well, higher at, but the embedded is for the Defender stack as well, and almost everyone is running Entra, so you'd get the embedded in Entra as well. But yep, the standalone is where you get to bring in all those third-party products, like you were saying.
hmm hmm hmm
Yeah, and here I'm just giving you just kind of a sampling. Again, I didn't want to do a lot of demos this session because we don't have a lot of time, but I did want to show you. So you essentially, let's just do this real quick. We're actually going to do it at the end a little bit more, but you essentially go into and create your compute unit, you deploy that, and then there's all these plugins that come out of the box from Microsoft, and you enable those. If you have that within your environment, for example, if I go into something like this, um, in Defender, Copilot starts up automatically. It's going to generate a summary and give me some things that I could think about doing against that incident. This is like a non-incident. I apologize. This is my own environment, but you can see how this works just because I had right that enabled for Microsoft Defender for XDR. So I have a bunch of stuff enabled in here. You can kind of see that.
Yeah, and then I like going in and I love the learning aspect because I want to know why it told me to do that. Because the more experience you have, I believe you'll question it more. You may come up with the same answer, but it's probably going to be faster than you because it's really rebuilding and indexing and remembering certain things that have already occurred the way you search. So back to that thing around prompt engineering, you can make yourself invaluable with being the go-to guy who writes the best prompts. And to some of our listeners who sound like they have a MSSP or a team of analysts, that's the value. What is going to set you aside from your competition? And they're going to, you'll look at it. And how do you measure it? Well, if your prompt is more efficient than someone else's, getting the same results in fidelity and costing less SEUs, which one do
I'm
I want to use?
thinking I'm thinking prompt master That's going
Prompt
to be on
master.
my resume. Yeah.
And someone had a question, is there a certification? Stay tuned for that. I heard a Burbity say that there is going to be certifications associated.
And there's
with
workshops being developed now on proper prompting and stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So this is, let me click on that real quick. This is, we kind of want to walk through the process, and we talked about plugins a little bit already, but this is actually part of that process as we start talking about how Copilot for Security actually works. Takes your prompt, takes your query or your statement and pushes it through the system, right? So number one, it looks at any plugins that have been enabled in your environment, right? So you can see there, and I showed you also kind of in that demo screen, these are the ones that have enabled in my environment. There's some other things that I have enabled. If you're interested in all the other stuff, the plugins, the skills, and the prompt books that we'll cover that next week. So don't forget to come back or at least watch the replay. But this is kind of important because this is how, there's probably a better graphic for this out there somewhere. And if you find it, don't hate me because mine sucks. But this is how Copilot for Security actually processes those prompt requests. You may not think about this very often. Again, I mentioned this early on. A lot of times when you get a tool or you're like, love this tool or this thing that you use all the time, you don't really care about what's going on in the back end as long as it works. But I promise you, at some point, you will start to consider, because this, number one, this is AI. Number two, this is about security. And if you're a security team, you will start thinking about, okay, so is it secure and safe? Is this being developed in a responsible way that I can trust this tool or trust what's going on the back end for this tool? And that's why we want to kind of hover here and talk about this for just a little bit. Again, there's a kind of a graphic that goes through it, but this is how the process works. So you submit your prompt. You're used to doing that. It's just like a search engine, right? You type in that thing. Not everybody's good at search engines. Not everybody will be good at prompting. That's why we're developing workshops and learn modules and stuff for that. So user submits the prompt. It gets sent. Copilot takes it and sends it back to that. What's that term I said you would never hear except for now? Except if you're on a call with
the
Andrea.
orchestrator.
The orchestrator, right? It sends it back to that orchestrator. Then orchestrator takes that. It bundles that user prompt with the full list of Copilot capabilities. And when I say that goes back to those plugins. So it takes that user prompt. It checks to see if it has any knowledge, any additional knowledge for that. And if it does, it gathers that and it packages it up and it sends it to Azure OpenAI. This is Microsoft's own implementation of OpenAI. Andrew, what is the version of ChatGPT that Copilot for Security is using right now?
I'm pretty sure we're using ChatGPT 4.5. I mean, not ChatGPT, but GPT 4.5.
4.5 Turbo, 4.5, the fastest one they have. I don't know.
Probably the fastest one they have. 4.5 sounds about right.
And I think it's important to, and even on your last picture, and I just even said it myself, which is ChatGPT, right? We're not talking about this going out into the internet looking for ChatGPT, right? We are talking about the GPT large language model, right? That Microsoft is using as part of Azure OpenAI, that also has been augmented with data from Microsoft's zillion years as a security expert.
Right.
So
how many trillions of signals is that? It's like trillions and trillions. Yeah.
Trillions of signals. That's the new thing. Right? Billions wasn't enough. Trillions, a gazillion. Is a gazillion a real number? Gazillion.
Yeah, it is now.
So Heathra Roy said, "What are the limitations of Copilot?" No one knows. I'll say that with certainty. We don't know yet, right? We're learning things about how AI, independent of a product set, is teaching the large language model data scientists new things. Is it safe to say that it's learning? I don't say that is true. I think that the way that information is being requested from it and inputs being put in is allowing AI to come back and I won't use the word creative. I'm saying that it's giving you a myriad of answers that are coming. So I don't know if there are limitations as of yet.
Well, and I think that's important to highlight too. And again, from a responsible AI perspective, Copilot for Security is hyper focused on security. I actually tried to use it to ask what type of camping gear I should use on a weekend where the forecast was rain. And yes, it absolutely probably could answer that. But again, this is hyper focused on security. It came back and said, I'm a Copilot for security. I can't answer that. So again, it's focus on security. It could do all those things. So part of the limitation we actually put in there ourselves, because we want it to be the best tool for security available.
And Reeve Lobo says something, and oddly enough, I know this. I don't know why. It's more akin to long chain and not Azure kernel, where you're talking about the orchestrator, right? And I was going through the deck. I was like, what do you know? I know what orchestration is. Let me go see what that is. And it's going to be closer to long chain, being able to see here and piece it together. Think of building a railroad, and as you go further down the line, you add another rail, right? And that's how you're looking at the orchestration. And then orchestration can be someone pulling the switch, and the train, for those that can see me live, will switch tracks for you to go a certain way. But yeah, not Azure kernel. That's totally something else.
Yeah, and I think one last thing before we jump to the next slide to highlight is that, just like Andrea said, this is Azure, this is Microsoft's version, this is Microsoft's implementation of OpenAI, but it's within what? Azure. So it uses the same secure, safe guardrails as all of our services, right? So Copilot for Security, even though it may get knowledge from other places, it's protected by the Azure security.
Yeah, and your data never leaves your tenant at all, right? That was some questions about that in the comments as well, right? So that data gets handed off to that orchestrator middleman. That orchestrator is who talks back to Azure OpenAI, and then it comes back, right? It's just like somebody standing in the middle handing off to make sure your data doesn't go to the wrong place.
Yeah. And
Uh,
someone asked, is there a sandbox or training model that you can do it? No, the
Not
simple
yet.
answer is it's not yet. And when you think about it, there is a way, but is it, you have to really think of the business model to be able to do that, to practice on it. I have some ideas about it, but we'll wait till the next show. And I love the questions of this gentleman asking around MSSP stuff, training, sandboxing, kicking the tires. There are opportunities for those who have some ingenuity on how to turn it into something viable for customers who say, hey, you want me to pay for the test drive, right? Here's another way that you can go do that. But
Well,
that's something for our partners to get creative.
yep.
Yeah.
Cecilia also mentioned that there might be something in Learn coming as well to help with some hands-on experience, whether it's going to be a full lab or not. I don't know that we know, but there is some plans for a more hands-on experience for people.
Yeah. And Edward mentioned earlier on that it's not autopilot, it's Copilot. But in that respect as well, and if you're interested in this, Tanium will showcase this on Wednesday on our Microsoft Security Insight show. That second bullet point there, first and third party integration partner apps gather information and what? They execute actions. So yes, this is a tool to produce skills and responses in natural human language so that we can understand it. But at the same time, there's some actions that can be taken just kind of based on some of those partners. Tanium will, like I said, we'll showcase and we'll talk about that on Wednesday. And we might talk a little bit more about it next week as well. So
Hate execute actions. It sounds like it's
Execute
yep.
actions.
Then finally a response sent back to Copilot. But again, this is super important. It doesn't really stop there. Those last two, those mid bullet points there, I think are super important. It goes through our own AI, responsible AI models to make sure that there's nothing in that response that's going to be offensive, that it's absolutely accurate as possible and factual. So if everything looks good, the response is sent back to the user. If something is malicious or inappropriate, it's going to generate an error message, right? So then you need to go back and look at your prompt again, and adjust it. I think prompting, if you're a really, really, really good search engine user, you're going to have to kind of rethink things just a little bit. But again,
Yeah.
that's why we're developing some.
Yeah. You don't want an Easter egg on your dime. You want to be very deliberate on what you're doing. Pavel asked the question, there are limitations within Copilot for security like 365. Yes. Rod gave an example. If you ask Copilot for security to create a PowerPoint slide, that's not his skill level, right? It's not his capabilities. Now, is there a possibility that Copilot for security will ration over PowerPoint? If it's an artifact, think about it, a malicious Word document that may have something embedded or a text file or something, but it's not going to go outside of his skill set. You'll get I can't help you with that right now because it doesn't understand the context of what you're trying to do. It's a security tool. I've tried to cross pollinate the regular 365 collaboration copilots with each other, and I found some roadblocks because Word Copilot would tell you, well, Excel's better at that. You should probably ask Excel that, or Excel say, well, that's really OneNote's strength to be able to do that, right? So Copilot has learned to pass the buck to his brethren. So think of Copilot as passing the buck. I'm here to do this job, and I want to do this job extremely well. So please don't ask me to create, Word documents or PowerPoint documents, right, for presentations. Now the summarization skills of it is pretty good, but then even then, it's only going to put out text, and you put it in the format that you want to use it in. Think of it that way.
So moving on, and I've talked about this earlier, but this is kind of like my hot point right here: effective prompting, right? So this is super important. Obviously, Microsoft is going to provide the tool, Copilot for Security, but at some point, and even in Copilot for Security, anyone that's seen it knows this. We include things like sample prompts, prompt books to show you kind of how this actually works and what prompts look like. Okay. But there is kind of a method to this madness. And again, if you're really good at Google, you're going to be a bad prompter. If that's your muscle memory. But here's the alternative to that. Good Googlers, if you're really good at Google. So my mom, she's horrible at search engines. I don't know why. There's just some people, and she's the type of person that emails me in all caps. I feel like she's yelling at me all the time. But there's just some people that can't even use search engines. Everybody knows at least one person. But even good Googlers, people that can use search engines fantastically, find the thing they're looking for in the first page of results, you still kind of have to approach it from a different mindset when you do this. So here's some elements of effective prompt. And this is going to be very simplistic, I promise you. The takeaways from here are that you go take what we give you and take what this learn module gives you and go do some additional research on this, because there's a lot out there. We have some out there in our learn docs already, just from general AI prompting and things like that. But again, we're developing some workshops and stuff around it. But you want to have a goal. You want to set an expectation. Here's what I want. Here's the expectation of this Copilot for Security. And there's a couple different tidbits, some pieces of information where you can kind of pinpoint exactly what it is. And here's some examples. A goal: give me information about this incident number, right? That's what I want. My context is I want a report that I can submit to my manager, knowing that managers usually don't read reports. They only read the pretty ones. They have to have nice colors. Obviously, you have to do a little bit of extra work after the fact, but at least you're going to get that report, whereas you might have to write that thing up yourself in the past. Now we can hone in and get very specific about this prompt by also adding some expectations and what source, where we want that information to come from. So I want information about incident 18718, and I want a report from my manager, but now I want to compile the information in a list with a short summary. Not just a report. My manager requires that all of my reports are in a list with a short summary. He doesn't want to read pages and pages of information, right? And also, I want this information from Defender. I don't want it from Sentinel. Our two teams are kind of separate. We have a Defender team, we have a Sentinel team, or maybe it's Defender team and a Splunk team. I only want this stuff from my team, the Defender. This is where I want this information for a report from my manager. Again, you can take your goal, your context, and then get very specific, and you kind of keep this in mind when you develop your prompts for Copilot for Security. Here's some examples. How can I improve my security posture? These are absolutely prompts that will work in Copilot for Security, that if you stand it up today, type these in. And in fact, if you go down to the bottom, see that QR code? If you want to scan that, I'll leave that there for just a second. If you want to scan that with your phone, that is a Copilot for Security prompt library. All of the prompts out there, you can copy and paste those into Copilot for Security and get some results and see what that looks like.
I will say, these are all prompts. I don't know that they're great prompts.
Well,
or
you're a good start, I would say.
You're being generous, Andrew. I would say they were terrible prompts, because you're asking it to be subjective. How can I improve my security posture? If you were to ask a human that, I would come back in what regards? In what regards to security posture? So now you're making it churn. Are there any machines affected? Well, if I'm an incident responder, I'm trying to limit my scope,
Affected
right?
by what, right? Or
Yeah, yeah. Summarize this incident in bullets. Uh, okay, that may be closer to something, but how many bullets do you want, right? Do you want a whole belt full of bullets? And then which alerts are being triggered the most? Well, when you ask these questions, you're asking it to go back and do historical trending when a more effective way would be to use some of the other security tools, right? If you got incidents that are firing, look in the Defender portal, and you can do a quick summarization of that or Sentinel alerting, and then to ask the number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If you ask number 5 to Copilot, it's probably going to go to lunch and come back because it may be insulted. It's going to say, "What is log for shell?" Well, that is highly documented in of what that particular exploit is. If I had to do that, what servers or what CVEs are affected by log4shell? I would be more pertinent,
Yeah.
that's more direct, so I can go in and patch and remediate those servers. And now if it says, tell me about Defender incident 20220259, tell you what, I would say, tell me all the artifacts that were included in incident. So you want to be very direct to it and not talk to it as though it's a human, because it's gonna want to please you. So it's gonna want to just give you an answer. You have to, what's the word in legal terms? You want to guide the witness. I want to guide the witness to the answer I'm trying to get to. And then that's where expertise come in, because it's
Yeah.
going to tell you something, but your expertise has to say, close, but no cigar.
Well, and that's the thing about a chat bot. It wants to please you. So whatever you ask it, it's going to give you a response. It may not be the greatest, but if you can develop your prompts and work on your prompts, it's going to build better. But Edward, you mentioned something that kind of answers a question in the chat too. Reeve asked, just wondering if Copilot for Security is fine-tuned with the latest vulnerabilities. You mentioned Log4j and stuff like that, and CVEs. So there's a Microsoft Defender for Threat Intelligence license that comes with Copilot for Security, which includes the intelligence of all of those trillions and trillions of signals, including the CVEs and stuff like that. So
yeah,
yes, it knows about all that stuff.
that would be like, to me, back to the previous slide where Rod was talking about, these are all fine prompts, but a way to
Yep.
make it better would be to be more specific, right? Are any of my machines affected by CVE 1234? Right. I
Yep.
kind of think about, if you ever have written KQL or anything like that, what's the first thing you do? You're like, sign in logs, where
Yeah.
time generated, right? I want you to shrink it down to make my query run as fast as it can and be as specific as it can, right? So
Maybe we should have said these. Okay, here's a list of bad prompts. Tell us why. How about that?
That's a good way to go about it. Tell
Yeah.
how this prompt can be better, right? Yeah.
Or, we could have said ask MDTI, right? Which was one of the things. What source
Oh,
do you want
right.
to use?
Yeah.
Ask MDTI what it knows about log4shell, right? That would have been a prompt that you would have told it where to go, what to look for, right? So it is definitely learning how to prompt in the most efficient way takes a little bit of time. I'm still learning it myself. I'm like, dang it, I should have asked for that in list format, or
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's spend a little bit of time showing everyone how to enable Microsoft Copilot for Security. In fact, I'll pull up my console here in just a second. We have some assessments coming up, but we're getting close to the end. I want to make sure that we capture this. So there's actually a couple of different places that you can provision an SCU for you, or multiple SCUs, if the case may be. The Azure portal, or if you just go to securitycopilot.microsoft.com, it will walk you through a wizard. I'm going to jump into my console right now, and I'm actually going to go into the Azure. That's where there's a tip. I might have to write up a blog post about this, why I prefer to use the Azure console for it. But we can't talk about that now. So literally, if you go into the Azure console and you look for Copilot for Security, it's going to bring up this Microsoft Copilot for Security compute capacities. All right. And once you find that service, you just go into Create. You give it the subscription you want to create it against, create a new resource group. So obviously I create resource groups because it's easier to manage who has access, but it's also easier to manage the costs, or at least be able to view the costs for those resources. Give it a capacity name, something very specific. These are the regions that the prompts are processed in currently. So select one of those. I saw this checkbox, which I check in mine, but I actually worked with a couple customers over the past couple days that didn't check that, and it didn't process quite as readily. So that's an interesting. So if this location, this one that you select is busy, it's going to use one of the other things. Okay.
And that's
Um,
just for the prompting power. It's not for
yep,
sending your data anywhere.
that's right. Yep, just for that compute. Um, You can choose up to 100. I wouldn't suggest you do that, but you can choose up to 100 SCUs per hour. I'm a small person with a small tenant. I use just one, and that's fine for me. We recommend at Microsoft how many, Andrea, to start with?
The average customer usually starting with 3 is a good baseline.
Yep. And so if I go through this process and I make all the selections and I go to the review and create, it takes 5-6 minutes, something like that, for it to deploy. And then after that happens, then you can go to security-copilot.microsoft.com. You can also, and then just make sure that the specific plugins, Microsoft plugins that you want to utilize for the integrated versions are enabled. And for example, I showed you this earlier. There is the response that when I went into that incident within Defender, it automatically gave me an incident summary, automatically supplied some investigation steps, guided response. So that's all pretty good stuff. It also tells me, hey, let's click this button to reset this password for Rod Trent because he's doing something screwy. I don't know who that Rod Trent guy is.
I will just say one, as Rod and I don't know, Edward, if you have been, but we've been installing this with customers over the last couple of days. If you decide you want to do this right afterward, the one gotcha that I've seen so far is if your Azure tenant requires identifying tag by Azure policy, this is going to fail, and you're going to have to set up a new Azure policy that does not require tags for this. For today, it's already a feature request. They're working on it. But so if anybody runs out today,
sounds like Andrea needs to write up a blog post about that.
I thought
All
you
right,
were going to do it.
we have time for everybody. Stay there. Don't move. We have time for knowledge check. And this, again, this is proof whether or not we covered everything adequately and gave you enough context and enough depth that you might be able to answer these things. So we're going to walk through these, right? There's the QR code. You can also vote at aka.ms/polls. And we can actually watch as you vote and see what the tally is. But here's the first question. What are the steps required to onboard organizations and users to Microsoft Copilot for security? Is it A, enable Copilot plugins and procure Microsoft Entra Premium 1 licensing? Did we talk about that? I don't know. B, procure Microsoft Entra Premium 1 licensing. Or C, provision SCUs, set up the default environment, and assign role permission. So I'm going to go over here.
So far, it's looking good, Rod. All the
Isn't
voters are getting it right so far.
Why is mine not showing up? Let's see.
We got
there we go. There we go.
13.
Oh man, I think maybe I helped people cheat on that one. Did I?
Well, good job,
have.
everybody.
Yeah, that's awesome. So the answer is provision SCUs, and that was 100%. Good job. Good job to our listeners, and thank you for that. We have question number 2. Andrea, would you like to cover this one?
Sure. So a security analyst is crafting a prompt to investigate an incident involving the Pearl Sleet actor. Which prompt will likely yield the most comprehensive result? Can you give me information about Pearl Sleet activity, including a list of known indicators of compromise in tools, tactics, and procedures? B, describe Pearl Sleet. C, list Pearl Sleet activities. Now, remember here, the question is all of these are valid, right? Which is going to give you the most comprehensive results?
Let's see. I'm watching. Wow, everybody, they're quick at voting. What? Somebody, I want to know what mouse you're using because it's much quicker than mine. I don't have a fast mouse.
Good job, everybody.
Let's see. Look at that. That's great. So let's see what that answer is.
I will say
here.
pretty much with any multiple
Yeah.
choice test, it's usually the longest one. That's the right one.
Yeah.
Is that right?
I think
Oh,
so.
I never thought about that.
You know,
I'm gonna ask for multiple choice tests from now on, and I'm gonna use that.
if you say describe Pearl Street, it's a Grammy Award winning indie rock band. That's what it come back and tell you, right?
Edward, this is your question.
An admin is tasked with setting up Microsoft Copilot for security and needs to provision capacity. After reviewing the options, which method should the admin choose to provision capacity for their organization? Is it A, provision capacity through a third-party vendor, B, provision capacity within Copilot for security, or C, provision capacity by directly purchasing SCUs from a software retailer? Hmm.
Hmm.
Mm, 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 mm,
Uh-oh, we
mm,
may be
mm,
split on
mm,
this one just a little
mm,
bit.
mm, 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 mm.
Let's see. So here's the funny thing. I'll just be embarrassingly honest about this. There was nothing in this original deck about SEUs. I added that because I saw this question. I was like, there's
Oh,
no way. We have to talk
good,
about
Rod.
this. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah. Yeah.
I could
All right.
see why some people would think C was the answer because that's what
Mhm.
you do with the majority of
Yeah.
Microsoft
Well,
tools.
and that's important to highlight. This is not licensing. People keep saying licensing. I'm like, don't say licensing. This has nothing to do with licensing at all. There may be some things that you license the other things, like Defender and I don't know. But Copilot for Security is not licensed, right? It's compute, it's consumption. So
Mhm.
the answer
So
is, are you ready? Drum roll. Do we have one? I don't have one. All
I
right.
doubt you can hear that, but I was drum rolling.
Okay. Provision capacity with Copilot for Security. It's literally all you need to do. Either go in the
Mhm.
Azure portal or go to security-copilot.microsoft.com and walk through the process of provisioning a what?
An
S
SCU.
U.
Yeah, we should have practiced that. We could do it all in unison.
Yeah.
All right, so summary. Hopefully we covered each and every bullet point. And if we didn't, feel free to reach out to Andrea
Yeah.
and let her
Well,
know that we need to do better next time.
yeah. Send all the emails to her. We'll put her email in the chat.
Yeah.
Just
We described what Microsoft Copilot for Security is. We talked about the terminology. Hopefully you remember much of that, particularly the SCU and maybe even the orchestrator. We talked about the security process, how Copilot for Security actually processes those prompts. Again, that may be the only time that you ever think about that, but again, it's super important because it is our approach at Microsoft to responsible artificial intelligence. We talked about the elements of an effective prompt. Hopefully, that's something that you'll research and start to build your own prompt engineering skills for. And then we talked about how to enable and actually showed you how to enable Microsoft Copilot security for you. Here's some additional resources. I believe that takes you to our Learn Docs.
uh-huh.
Cecilia would be super happy about that. And please don't leave here today without thanking Cecilia for our Copilot for Security docs in the chat. She's wonderful.
And
Right?
before we leave, Brian Lugo asked us several questions around Copilot for Security's capability around compliance. Well, there's a huge amount of work being done with Copilot for Purview. And so, I don't know the ins and outs, but you asked the question, if someone accidentally put in confidential data inside of it, what would happen? Is that a DLP issue, whatever? Well, the fact that someone could put the confidential data in there means that maybe there's not proper controls against the disbursement of that confidential data. So,
That's a larger discussion. Yeah,
that's a
absolutely.
larger discussion. And then there's huge effort around Copilot in Purview. We need to find an expert to come talk about that. And I may know one.
We'll do
Come
that on
talk
the
about that.
show. Yeah.
Do it on the show. Mhm.
Here's next week's event. Do not miss this because we will dig quite a bit deeper into the console and show you all kinds of cool things that we can accomplish and do with Copilot for Security beyond just prompting and getting responses. All right.
Mhm.
So don't miss it next week. That's it from us. I truly appreciate you all joining today. I truly appreciate the engagement. Oh my goodness, so many questions. And I hope you've gotten your answers. And if you didn't, don't hesitate again to reach out. I'm super easy to find.
Thanks,
So
everyone.
thank you, everyone. We'll talk to you next time.
Shh. There you go.